Hey, if you want access to the transcripts and the show notes and the links talked about as part of this episode, you can head to Seven. So the word all spelled out, SEVEN hyphen health.com/326. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Real Health Radio. I'm your host, Chris Sandel. I'm a nutritionist and a coach and an eating disorder expert, and I help people to fully recover. So before we get on with today's episode, I just want to mention that I'm currently taking on new clients. So if you are living with an eating disorder and you want to reach a place of full recovery, then I would love to help. Even if the idea of full recovery seems like some kind of pipe dream or something that you feel that is hard to connect to, I truly believe that everyone can reach a place of full recovery. And this is true whether an eating disorder has been going on for a year or multiple decades. So if you want to reach a place of full recovery or you want support with recovery in any form, then please reach out. You can send an email to info@7-health.com. Just put coaching in the subject line and then I can send over the details. So today it is a guest interview, and my guest on the show today is Oona Hanson. So Oona is a writer, educator, and parent coach who supports families navigating diet culture, including those who have a child in treatment for an eating disorder. Oona holds a master's degree in educational psychology and a master's degree in English. A regular contributor to CNN, Oona has been featured widely, including on Good Morning America, The Washington Post, USA Today, US News and World Report, People, and Parents Magazine. She writes the Parenting Without Diet Culture newsletter and will publish her first book in 2026 with Cambridge University Press. She's a mother of two and lives in Los Angeles. So I've been following Oona for maybe 6 to 9 months on Instagram, and I really love the content that she is putting out, and this is why she's on the show. I go into this in a little more detail in the intro, so I won't repeat myself here. And as part of this, as part of the episode, we talk about Oona's relationship with food and how she got into being a parenting coach. We talk about her child developing an eating disorder and how they dealt with this. And connected to this, we talk about FBT or family-based treatment, which we look at or go through like what this is, how it works, and the nuances around it. We go through many of the areas that parents are reaching out to Oona about and talk about different specifics with different scenarios connected to these. So we talk about body image, we talk about kids going off to college, going to the doctor's office, self-esteem, eating disorders in teen boys. And so going to each of these different areas and looking at topics connected to them. And we also talk about the Common Sense Camp, which is a program to help parents teach their kids essential life skills that Oona and her husband developed. And I know from what I've just shared here, a lot of the focus is on parents and parents helping kids with certain issues or struggles they're dealing with. But even if you don't have kids or you do have kids, but it's you that is struggling with these issues, then I still think that this episode is going to be helpful. So see this advice through the lens of reparenting. So the advice on what is given to the child or given to the parent to give to the child is the same support that you can then show yourself. So that is it for this intro. Let's get on with the show. Here is my conversation with Oona Hanson. Hey, Oona, welcome to Real Health Radio. Thanks for joining me on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So I need to just start and say how I became aware of your work. I have a group program as part of the work that I do with eating disorders. I work with people one-on-one, but there's always a group element as part of that, or at least that's how it's been over the last 18 months or so. And you are someone who is regularly posted about in our group. So there will be links to either articles or to posts from your Instagram. And that was how I became aware of you. And then for whatever reason, the algorithm started serving up more of your stuff. And I've just always really enjoyed seeing what you're posting out there. And that was why I wanted to get you to come on and be on this podcast, because I really love the messages that you're putting out. And there are lots of people who need a person like you to be able to help them navigate this stuff. So yeah, thank you for doing what you do.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. That means a lot. I'm an educator at heart, so knowing that I'm helping people learn new things is just that makes my day.
Nice. Well, look, what I want to do as part of this conversation, I really want to make it a practical one. As you said, you're an educator. I know you're helping parents, and so I want to be able to talk about specific stuff that people are coming to you for and seeking advice or support on, and what are some of the things that you're suggesting in those situations. But I also want to just talk a little about you and your background and how you got into doing all of this. So just as a kind of a starter for anyone of the listeners who don't know who you are, do you want to give a bit of a background on who you are, what you do, what training you've done, that kind of thing?
Yeah, sounds good. So my name is Oona Hanson, and I'm an educator, a writer, and a parent coach. And I focus on helping families of kids of all ages navigate diet culture and eating disorders. And as I said, I'm an educator at heart. My first career was as a high school English teacher, and I coached girls field hockey. And um, even then, I started to pick up on the fact that teenagers' parents often needed a lot of support. So when I would have phone calls or conferences with parents, I got this sense, even before I had my own kids, that parents are they want to get it right. They want to get it right. They want to do their best for their kids, and they don't always know how to get the support and information to know how to trust their instincts or when to seek help. So fast forward, I had my own kids. I got really interested in learning about learning. So I went back and got a master's degree in educational psychology, and I started doing parent education and even some teacher training and professional development. And then I had a child develop an eating disorder. And very quickly, people came out of the woodwork who had been struggling with this in their families, and I had no idea. But
Yeah.
they knew I was someone that they could trust to come to for help. And so pretty quickly, I narrowed the focus of my parent education and parent coaching to focusing on things like eating disorders, body image, navigating the system of healthcare, especially in the US. I know there's controversy going on in the UK right now as well.
Yeah.
But it's pretty tricky to navigate here. And this is my passion. So I see parents who are more thinking about prevention. Maybe they know that they struggled with these things. So I might see parents of younger kids who want to get ahead of it and want to break those intergenerational cycles. I also see families who are thinking, I think something might be a little bit off. What's my next step? So I guide them in that. And then I work also with parents whose kids are in eating disorder treatment. And I specialize in families doing family-based treatment, also sometimes called Maudsley method.
Yeah.
And then I write a lot about these topics too.
Okay. Nice. And so when you retrained to be this educator before you'd had this situation with your child developing an eating disorder and that narrowed your scope, what were you helping parents with at that stage?
So it was primarily things like communication between home and school, deciding about the next school. Let's say they're transferring from from elementary to middle school.
Yeah.
How do they decide what's best for their student? Should they get a therapist for their child? Navigating homework demands. Homework demands have gone up significantly. It hasn't translated into better learning outcomes that we've been able to at least to capture in the data. And so navigating a lot of struggles around homework that was a big part of what I was doing, and helping teachers understand how they could make some modifications to their homework to actually get the best out of their students and actually make it easier on them as well.
Okay. And so let's go back a little further than this and talk about you. Like obviously you're now in this area where you're talking about and helping parents with children with eating disorders. A lot of what your I think your taglines around how to do food without diet culture or parenting without diet culture. So tell me about your history with all this. If we go back to you as a kid, what was food like growing up in your household?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, I was protected from, we didn't know the term diet culture then, but
Yeah.
protected from a lot of that because I was just, happened to be in a smaller body as a kid. I didn't have parents who were dieting. Um, but when I got to, the adolescent years, definitely reading, 17 magazine, watching MTV, my friends and I were all very aware of sort of what was considered sort of ideal in terms of body size or appearance. And so I did struggle with some negative body image, definitely some disordered eating, although it was very normalized.
Yeah.
So I didn't, didn't seem disordered. It seemed like this is what you're supposed to do if you follow, what the teen magazines tell you to do to get ready for summer or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so I definitely struggled with that. And I was an athlete. And I remember, realizing, even in high school, wow, if I'm following the rules of this, magazine article about your bikini body, it's really hard to run fast on the field hockey team. And so I was already picking up on this tension of, this something isn't quite right here. Um, and then, it really wasn't something I thought too much about. And, it was just not, it's the water we're swimming in, right?
Yeah.
Diet culture. I wanted to protect my kids from having any of these struggles, right?
Yeah.
I saw not just what I had gone through, but, what friends had gone through. And so I had like this, what I thought was a foolproof plan to protect my kids from body image issues. I had the best, best laid plans, but I really didn't know a lot. I thought I knew a lot about eating disorders and body image and food, but I knew just enough to be dangerous. And I think that's true for a lot of people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, I'm sure you've encountered this in your work too. People have a false confidence about what they know about eating disorders, right?
Yeah.
Because the headlines kind of repeat these narratives and people like, oh, I understand what eating disorders are all about, or I know what they so-called look like.
Yeah.
And that's really where people can get into a lot of trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And so when you say I had this plan, what was your plan, how to deal with this? And then we can look at it and go, what did this turn into later on as a possibly better plan?
Yeah, I think I thought, well, if I have a daughter and someone gives her a Barbie doll, I won't let her play with Barbie dolls.
Right.
I thought as long as I never disparage my own body in front of my kids, they're going to learn positive body image. But I was still complimenting people on weight loss,
Yeah.
right? So I wasn't disparaging my body or other people's bodies, but I was complimenting weight loss. Um, so things like that, where I was like, I sort of understood certain things, but I didn't really have the tools or the knowledge to have kind of a bigger picture. I also didn't realize the way that diet culture kind of, there's this Trojan horse about health,
Yeah.
right? That if you're feeding your family in a healthy way or healthy foods, that's going to be a really good thing, not realizing the way that diet culture has co-opted these ideas around health and wellness. So I was really, even with the best of intentions, I was perpetuating certain ideas about, good and bad foods, not
Yeah.
realizing how that is understood, especially, from a child's perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then yeah, tell us a little about what happened in terms of
Look back on is how long it was going on before we realized
yeah.
something that this was an eating disorder. And again, that false confidence is what led to that. Um, when you have a high achieving, very conscientious child, you never can imagine that they're not telling you the truth, right?
Yeah.
So packing a lunch for school, sending breakfast to school, um, for the bus ride to school, assuming that those are getting eaten, right? Child comes home from athletic practice. Oh, they gave us food at practice, so I'm not really that hungry for dinner. Okay, that sounds possible that a teen parent might bring food. Um,
Yeah.
so that's one example, right, of how easy it is to kind of get the wool pulled over your eyes, and not that the child is trying to manipulate you, but that the eating disorder is manipulating your child and getting the whole family to kind of participate without you realizing. Someone with anorexia didn't eat at all.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize the ways that under eating, a state of semi-starvation is still very serious.
Yeah.
Um, The other piece is, you think of dramatic weight loss as a symptom, which it can be. But when you're seeing your child every day,
Yeah.
it's not as dramatic, right? Things that are gradual are harder to pick up on. And then, ideas around health, around, it was not something I had any concern about, but the narrowing and the eliminating of food options, again, under the guise of health, or, absolutely an animal loving, environmentally conscious child might want to reduce their intake of animal products. And at the same time, I didn't know that that could be a risk factor, that a child could get into energy deficit really easily,
Yeah.
or that having a lot of rules and restrictions around food as an adolescent can really take them down a pretty dangerous path, even if their intention was not to change their body or to lose weight.
Yeah.
And then one other thing I'll add, I think, I knew quite a bit about adolescent development. So that was something that I had really focused on in my graduate work, and also just as a teacher, having worked with a lot of teenagers. I I saw teen moodiness or irritability or isolation as just an expected part of the teen years.
Yeah.
And I think teenagers like get a really bad rap in the sense of, as a culture, people kind of tell you as a parent, oh, just wait for the teen years, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a lot of there's like a cultural smear campaign against adolescents. And actually, I think teenagers and adolescents are wonderful.
Yeah.
Um, but I think those cultural messages led me to dismiss certain mood changes that really were a sign of something isn't right. But I was
Yeah.
thinking, oh no, I'm going to let this ride. This is just the way it goes. Everyone warned me. This is what it's going to be like. So all those things together um, really made it so that we didn't see what was happening right in front of our eyes. And this was, part of why I love doing this work, is that pretty much every parent I meet will say, I wish I had caught this sooner. And parents can have so much shame and self-blame and guilt around this. And I know that if it can happen in my home, it can happen anywhere.
Yeah.
And you only know what you know, and you can't know what you don't know. And
Yeah.
that's, again, coming back to that education piece. I think the more parents are aware of these warning signs, the better off they'll be in terms of catching things earlier, getting their kid the support they need. And luckily, we when we discovered that this is probably what is going on, we, got my child help right away. That wasn't necessarily it wasn't like a quick fix, right?
Yeah.
I think I also thought,
Never really
okay,
is.
right? I thought, okay, we are fortunate enough to have access to, really well-respected professionals. They're going to give us a plan, and we're going to hand it over to the pros.
Yeah.
And, my child ended up having to go through a lot of different kinds of treatment, all the higher levels of care. Things weren't getting better.
Yeah.
Like with more treatment, in many ways, like new behaviors and symptoms were coming up, and a lot of things that happened in treatment were actually pretty harmful. Hearing the doctor say, "Don't worry, we won't let you get fat."
Yeah.
Hearing eating disorder professionals perpetuate the very fears that the eating disorder has, that was not helpful.
Yeah.
And I've come to learn that is all too common for people to hear that in treatment.
Yeah.
We were really lucky, though. Over the course of many months, we did get encouragement to try another option. Well, we had tried all the other options, so it was kind of a no-brainer at that point. And
Yeah.
that's when we learned about family-based treatment, and that's what helped save my kid's life, and I think really saved our family. So I know it's not, there's no one size fits all in eating disorder recovery.
Yeah.
I also know that I do feel strongly that FBT can work for more families than we think it can. And so that's one of the things I like to share with families when they have questions or concerns. They've heard maybe horror stories about FBT going badly. I always say, bring me those questions. I want to hear what you're hearing and what you're worried about. And a lot of times I can allay those fears and help them find the right program or provider that can really give them the personalized support that we got, yeah, saved my kid's life.
Awesome. Well, I want to touch on a couple of things you said there, especially with eating disorders developing around that adolescence, teenage years, and how difficult it can be for the parent. Because as you said, like they're going through this phase of individuation, that they're deciding who they are, and that could mean that, hey, I'm getting much more into sports. And that's a really healthy, good thing. And it can also be a really not healthy, good thing. And hey, I'm much more concerned about the planet and I want to do certain things, whether that's around climate or around animals or whatever. And so yes, that can be a really helpful thing, and that can also not be a very helpful thing. There can be, as you say, a lot of mood stuff, a lot of, hey, I don't want to speak to you. There could be times where, hey, all through their younger years, you were seeing them either nude or semi-nude or with very little clothes on, and then they hit this point where actually, no, I don't want you seeing me in that way. And so it becomes a lot more difficult to notice how certain changes occurred. And for different people, there can be the weight spurt first and then the height growth spurt. And it doesn't always happen in this nice, neat way. And so it can be very easy to think, well, they've shot up a little bit, and maybe that's what's going on. And so I think there are plenty of reasons why this can be missed, or there can be things that are chalked up to just being normal and fine, and then it's later on that you discover that that's not so. And like we are all putting on performances in terms of how things are compared to what it's really like. I think about myself as a teenager and what would have been presented versus what was going on inside. I have a 7-year-old son, and he has high anxiety. And it's only in more recent times that I've realized I don't think I know the half of it in terms of how intense and challenging that is for him. And even for him when he's not putting on his sort of best self, and I can see that he's struggling, there's an understanding of, I think this is a lot more challenging than I imagined. And so for all of these reasons, I can really understand how all of this can get missed. And I have a huge amount of compassion. I mean, I work in this role, and I'm like, this would be my absolute nightmare to have a child go through this, even with everything that I know about it. This is my job, this is what I help people with, but there's that piece of I can only do so much in terms of it really does come down to the individual, that there has to be this willingness to want to get better, at least to some degree, for this to actually start working. And I know part of where FBT can come in to this is that, okay, there's a lot more of the parents taking the lead of this, but that's still no guarantees with this stuff.
Right. And I do think that motivation piece, especially for kids, is also what can hold kids back from recovery,
Yeah,
right? If the sort of waiting for them to have the motivation when the illness might be, especially if their weight suppressed, can be preventing them from having motivation. And that's where a loving parent or caregiver can be the motivation, the bridge to motivation. You can draft off the parent's motivation,
sure.
start getting the child renourished. And once their, actual cognitive function is back online, then of course, you're handing over more and more of the responsibility and the motivation to the child. But I think that's probably one of the most dangerous myths, right? That someone, has to want to get better in order to get better. I understand where that comes from.
Yeah,
But when by definition, the illness is preventing you maybe from recognizing you're ill, but
yeah,
also physically preventing you from doing the things that are going to help you recover, that's where and it doesn't have to be a parent. I worked with families of older kids, and it was their spouse or their roommate or significant other who really helped them start to renourish themselves so that they could then take more ownership over their recovery. And that's to your point about adolescence and autonomy. I think a lot of parents get the message, and we were told this too. We were told, don't be the food police. You have to give your kid autonomy. This is how they're going to develop the strength to recover and have ownership. And that made sense to me from everything I knew about adolescent development. But
yeah,
the problem as a child who's under the control of an eating disorder, they don't have autonomy, right?
Yeah.
The eating disorder is what's standing in the way of autonomy. So if parents can step in and play this critical role in helping their child start to separate from the eating disorder first, then the child can work on separating from the parents. And so
Yeah.
that kind of that order of operations is something that once I learned about that, it was like this light bulb, like, oh, this makes so much more sense. And that's really that was the game changer.
Okay. Well, let's maybe just take a step back. And for anyone listening who is like, what the hell is FBT? What are you people talking about? Do you want to just explain it a little bit so that we can bring people up to speed with this?
Yeah, so FBT is family-based treatment, and that can be kind of a confusing term. I think people hear family and they think, oh, it's the family that's the problem. Or you'll hear people call it family-based therapy, and they think, oh, it's family therapy. Like this
Yeah.
family needs to work on some things. Um, so first, let's like clear up some myths. So family-based treatment is a manualized treatment for eating disorders in adolescence. It's actually, statistically our best option for that age group in terms of recovery. It's still not great. Like we can keep improving.
Yeah.
It's a low bar in eating disorder treatment, as you know, right? For what's considered like recovery rates or success rates. Um, but basically, family-based treatment comes from the Maudsley method developed at the Maudsley Hospital in the UK, where, families were part of helping renourish a child. And, it was, the kids were sort of coming back to life, right, with more food and with that family support. And it makes a lot of sense when you think about it in terms of, if we send kids away to treatment, which sometimes we have to do, and we did that in our family as well, if you're not also giving the family information, skills, support, then the child's coming back home and I guess they're supposed to just be able to do this all on their own. It just doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
Or when you think about a child having any other serious life-threatening illness, I can't imagine taking them out of their home environment and not allowing the family to be part of that treatment. It's why we have, Ronald in the US, like Ronald McDonald House, like housing for parents whose kids are in the hospital for something very
Yeah.
serious, right? So they can be there. But for some reason with eating disorders, because we have all these myths and stereotypes about families causing eating disorders, there's this idea like, oh, if we take them out of this like potentially problematic environment, they're going to suddenly get well over here without any of their support, their pets, their friends, their family. They're just going to work with these professionals, get better, and then somehow just come back into their normal life and carry on with their recovery. Like
Yeah.
when you think about it, it just doesn't really make sense. And I know I'm oversimplifying, and lots of, residential programs have stepped down to day programs, IOP, PHP, or virtual support. So it's not as harsh necessarily, but I've seen it be pretty harsh in terms of people getting just kicked out. Basically you're done with treatment, you've gained X number of pounds, your insurance isn't going to pay. Now it's time to go back home. And no wonder people relapse or never get to a robust recovery.
Yeah. Or
Okay,
they're
so
on or they're on a ward where it's not just eating disorders, it's other mental health issues, and it's not just other kids who are 12 to 14 or 16. It's then with adults, and there's a huge amount of trauma through going through that experience. Like I was already scared before I was then removed from my home and put in this place, and I didn't want to be here. And so, yeah, there are lots of reasons why that can be a very traumatizing experience.
absolutely. And there are times where it's absolutely life-saving, right?
For sure.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it's going to be traumatic for your child to have to be in a let's say an inpatient hospital setting, and that may be what they need, if they're so medically or psychologically fragile, that can be a really important step in helping get a child, to recover. And I apologize if you're hearing the demolition next door to me through my
I'm not
headset.
hearing no demolition man. So it's
Okay,
all
okay,
good.
good, good, good. So yeah, so family-based treatment, it is a manualized treatment, meaning a therapist can be trained to deliver this treatment over a set number of sessions, and there are sort of like assignments or goals for each session. And the whole family attends these appointments. And then a lot of the work is happening at home, right? So parents are really put in charge at the beginning of helping renourish their child and creating a recovery supporting environment at home.
Yeah.
I often think of it as like you're turning your home into a residential treatment center for one child in your own home, right?
Yeah.
So really getting the support to create that kind of structure and support for your child. And there are three phases to FBT. So, parents are really in charge of the food and movement at the beginning. In phase two, there's gradual movement toward the child taking over more and more of the ownership.
Yeah.
And then phase three is really about relapse prevention and addressing any of the other potentially co-occurring conditions. So a child who has co-occurring OCD or depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder or any other issues that are going on in that phase three, that therapist is also focusing on those things and also just adolescent development, right? Especially kids who've been sick with an eating disorder often kind of go on pause, right? There's a little bit of a stalling out of their development. And, there's a lot of catch up that can happen. And that's also what can happen in that phase three, where the therapist can really support them to develop their social skills and their social and emotional regulation,
Yeah.
and communication and things like that. Um, and that's the sort of overview. But more and more people are finding that, a more personalized approach, right? You don't have to go by the book. I mean, the by the book version it can work. It has worked. We have evidence that it works.
Yeah.
I've even known families that didn't have an FBT provider in their area, and they bought the manual written for healthcare providers. They bought the manual and basically did it DIY on their own, for their family, and that worked too. And there are some fabulous books out there written for parents about helping their child recover. So there are a lot more resources out there now. And then a lot of treatment providers and treatment programs are starting to build a more like holistic support
Yeah.
around FBT because FBT is really hard. I mean,
Yeah.
you need a parent or guardian in many cases in phase one to support every meal and snack and to
You
monitor
are basically
for,
becoming the inpatient services, where
right.
you are the one that is making everything, that is sitting there, is making sure that that food is consumed. It's a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah, and you're monitoring for purging behaviors, exercise, all those kinds of things. Again, just as you said, just as if they were in a treatment facility. So
Yeah.
it's incredibly draining. And so parents need a lot of support. Even though it's not forever, right? It's for this finite period of time, which again, I can't give a number because everybody is different.
Yeah.
But in
The
many
the
cases,
finite amount of time can feel infinite.
right.
Yeah.
Because it can be months and months.
Yeah.
And what's nice is that more and more, people are realizing parents need support. Um, the traditional FBT says you don't need a dietitian. Parents know how to feed their kid. So it's just the therapist, the parent or parents, and the child. And siblings are involved too. That's the other, I think, important thing about FBT is that siblings are part of the conversation if it's appropriate, right?
Yeah.
That's because I think when siblings are left out of these conversations, it's even scarier, right? To not know what's happening with their brother or sister. Um, and so FBT really helps bring the siblings into the mix. The siblings are not in charge of doing the delivery of the treatment. I want to make that really clear. I mean, there are
Yeah.
rare cases where adult siblings can be supported to provide some of that care, but in general, siblings are just to be part of the conversation and that they understand what the eating disorder is and why the family is taking this approach and that they have a place to share their feelings and their fears and their worries. Um, so back to sort of modern, or I'd say like more flexible FBT.
Yeah.
A lot of families do benefit from working with a dietitian because in diet culture, if the family unknowingly, if their way of eating and feeding their kids is very, maybe on like orthorexic type, part of the spectrum of eating, it can be
Yeah.
really hard to renourish their child. So sometimes having a dietitian reassure parents that they can bring this all foods fit, or at least bring in some more variety, and that their fears about food, we can address those. That's really going to help their child. And that's really helpful, right? For their child to have someone to talk to who's not the therapist doing the FBT.
Yeah.
Again, it has to be done well, because as you know, if people aren't all on the same page, the eating disorder loves to split and
Yes.
yeah, kind of make everyone question themselves and try to find like who's going to give them the answer that the eating disorder wants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for then the kid who is then hearing this ambiguity, that just that's a nightmare. Like it just gets latched onto, and yeah, everything halts. So you said that okay, there are more and more people who could use this, and maybe more than people realize. When would this be something where you be wary of or think, okay, maybe this isn't the right approach?
So a doctor that I worked with, and I think that makes sense to everyone.
Yeah.
Um, at the same time, I have talked to quite a few people who will say, if maybe there's a history of abuse, but if the family is getting support from a therapist as they're working through all, like it could actually be very beneficial to a family that has had a history of problems, right?
Yeah.
So that's where it's not family therapy, right? Despite the name having family and sometimes having the word therapy in it, although I always consistently call it family-based treatment. Because the whole family is involved, this is an opportunity for a lot of interpersonal things to come out into the open and be talked about.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but I think there are a lot of myths about families need to be, that it has to be an intact family with two parents. That's just not true. Or that it has to be a family where one parent is staying at home. I've seen this work amazingly well, where both parents or two parents and they're working, or even a single parent who's working.
Yeah.
Um, I've seen people say, oh, you shouldn't do FBT if, let's say, there's a sibling in the home that has some kind of special needs of their own, right? That's just, and again, the family will need a lot of support.
Yeah.
But I've also seen, oh, that, a college age, a young adult is too old for FBT. In fact, there's an adaptation of FBT called FBT-TAY,
Yeah.
FBT for transition age youth. We know that this can work very well for that age group. And it does look a little different than, for a 24-year-old compared to a 14-year-old or younger.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it really comes down to support and education. And that's why, what I love doing is supporting parents who are doing this, because it is really hard. You can believe this in your soul that this is going to work. You want to implement all of these, strategies and skills to help your child recover, without the support to take care of yourself, without some tips and scripts, even because
Yeah.
having been an English teacher, I love words and I love helping parents find the words that help them support their child, help regulate their own nervous system. And because the eating disorder can make it feel like you can never say anything right.
Yeah.
And so parents get really, sort of tongue-tied about, well, what do I say? How do I do this? And then they just explode with maybe anger or frustration or fear, which is completely understandable. But sometimes having some language to come back to can really, really be helpful. So that's something that I love working on with parents. And like, that's not something that's in the manual, for instance,
Yeah, for sure.
right? This is something that, parents with lived experience, I think can share with other parents and really pass along, like, here's what I learned the hard way. Let me
Yeah.
help you learn an easier way. And it's things like, I'm sure Eva Mustby. So Eva Mustby, she's a parent coach as well. She's in the UK. She has fantastic free resources on her website, and
Okay.
also her YouTube videos are phenomenal. These beautiful animated short videos that explain key concepts about helping a child recover from an eating disorder. They're
Yeah.
so user friendly, and yeah, I can't recommend her enough. And she has books and things as well, but there's so many free resources out there as well. But yeah, if you can get her book, if you're a parent listening and you think, I could use that help, she's a great resource.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'll put that in the show notes, and people can then check it out. That's I it's a new name to me, so that's great to hear. I guess one of the ones that comes up a lot, and I don't actually know what the the right solution is in this situation, and maybe you have some advice on this, but the ones where parents have said to me, like, we did FBT, and if we had our time over, we wouldn't, were with kids that were neurodivergent and typically had PDA, so pathological demand avoidance, which I
Mhm.
absolutely hate as a term, but just means that there's a lot of no that comes up, and there's a lot more to it than just there's a lot of no that comes up. But the parents being the ones sort of really dictating this is what you're going to do, they just said it just did absolutely not work, and it just broke things and it made things so much worse. And so, as I said, I don't know what the solution is, but I've heard that enough times to think, okay, maybe in that situation, that's not the right approach.
Yeah, I mean, I have worked with families doing FBT with neurodivergent children, and I think it has to be personalized, right?
Yeah,
Again, it's not the manualized by the book version, but I think parents can be tremendous supports for their child. Learning about, it has to be a provider who understands what the child's experience is and
yeah,
helping the child express that to their parents. Yeah, there's no one size fits all, but I do think having that family structure and support
yeah,
around the recovery is key. I think one thing that comes to mind with that question, I think for some young people with RFID, parents may think this is a problem that is going to be fixed,
yeah,
right? And that with a certain number of weeks or sessions that my child's going to eat like the rest of the family. And with a lot of presentations of RFID, when it's really part of just a sensory experience around food, their child may never eat this exactly the same way as everyone else in the family. And so really understanding what the expectations are and really learning how to accept and stay attuned to their child, I think that can be done really well in a family-based treatment kind of structure.
sure.
But I agree, it has to be personalized and individualized.
Yeah,
And sometimes it may be a child hasn't been diagnosed with people aren't aware that the resistance is not coming from the eating disorder, it's
yeah,
coming from some other factor. So yeah, that is really important. If something isn't feeling right, this is where maybe asking the provider, could is there someone else we could talk to? Is there some supervision we could get or some more support we could get? This feels like maybe this is not the eating disorder only as the barrier to eating, let's say.
yeah, yeah. And in terms of the people I'm remembering where this was the case, one, it wasn't off it was anorexia, and so the difficulty
Mhm.
wasn't just that there's certain sensations and textures, it was much more of a the amount that was then needed. And for them, they could identify like this stuff goes back way before
Mhm.
the eating disorder was there. And it might not have been necessarily so much around food, but there's been a lot of this just difficulty getting the child to do anything unless the child was the one that really wanted to do that thing. And that then can become very, very difficult when you then bring in a severe mental disorder like an eating disorder, where
Mhm.
where so much of someone's perspective and perceptions is shifted because of being in that state.
Yeah, it is really tough. And I think I'm so glad that there are more and more people thinking about these issues. And,
Yeah,
it's not just like, yeah, send your child away for treatment or do this manualized treatment at home, and that's going to be the only option. But yeah, that makes sense to me that parents who aren't getting that kind of personalized support would think FBT was a disaster.
yeah.
If another kind of treatment is working better, yeah, I'm not going to say no, yank your kid out and do FBT, right?
Sure. And
So
and
I think
that's
it's
my thing. I was like, I don't know, I don't know a better solution. I just know for them they were like, this wasn't great, and it was so hard. But again, I think the alternatives would also had been creating lots of hardship and struggles. So it just, yeah, just something I had noticed, and I wondered if you'd sort of had any insights. So what I think would be useful, as I said at the top, I want to go through some other issues that you're commonly seeing in your practice or that people are coming to you with, and what are some of the advice that you have around this? And I also should just say that Ali, my wife, and I have gone to see people similar to you for lots of things since we've had our son Ramsey for various stuff in terms of how to best support him. And what's been really interesting for us, and I'd love to hear for you how much this applies as well, is that some of this is around understanding and education and tips and stuff of okay, what we can do. But so much of it has actually been around us and me understanding how I am and how my nervous system is and how much I'm then a mirror to him. And that actually so much of the work has then been me doing my own stuff so that then I can come into this in a very different way so that I have a different perspective on how I should be in this situation. And that so much of it has been a lot of unlearning around, okay, I get that that's how I was parented, and maybe it worked, maybe it didn't work so well, but I know in this situation it clearly isn't working well, and I have these expectations, and these expectations are wrong based on what's actually happening. And so a lot of the work has been around for lack of a better word, like cleaning up my own stuff. And that's the thing that's had the biggest impact when I then kind of return into then being in dad mode. And so I just want to get a sense from you, like how much of your work is that type of stuff versus, hey, I think in this situation, these are the two or three steps that you should be taking.
Yeah, it's such a great question. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is when we're talking about eating and body image, it's really hard for parents to look at the way that they're role modeling certain things, right? Like,
Yeah,
and because as we talked earlier, diet culture makes us think a lot of the things we're doing to and for our bodies are for our health.
yeah,
We may not realize the way that it's being perceived by our kids. So in terms of, whether it's using a fitness tracker, whether it's cutting out foods, whether it's doing, intermittent fasting or
yeah,
any other thing like that, that a parent might think, oh, I'm biohacking or I'm optimizing performance, or my doctor said, I'm pre diabetic, so I should, um, really change things up in my diet. And so it can be really hard for parents to recognize the things that might be worth being curious about, right?
yeah,
I don't blame parents do not cause eating disorders. I feel very strongly about that. And although I know some people who've had eating disorders who very much blame their parents, and they have every right to do so. That's their lived experience. From my perspective, I don't find blaming parents useful or effective.
yeah,
I think parents already feel guilty if their child becomes ill with anything, but especially eating disorders because of these cultural narratives around dysfunctional families causing eating disorders or controlling mothers causing eating disorders, or fill in the blank.
yeah,
um, but I blame diet culture, right? I blame
yeah,
the ways that parents, they themselves were raised around food and body and the world that we live in.
yeah,
um, yeah, so taking out, it can be a cold hard look in the mirror sometimes for parents around their own relationship with food and body. And especially, let's say they're, helping their child renourish, and, their child is going to need a lot of energy dense food, right?
yeah,
Um, and, if mom or dad or other caregivers aren't eating those foods too, that it can make it harder for the child to recover. Now, the child might need more than the parents do, right? Because they're having to, make up for that energy deficit. Um, but that can be kind of one of the wake up calls for parents to realize, like, oh, I'm afraid to eat this food that my kid is afraid to eat because of their eating disorder.
yeah,
So it can be that moment of empathy too, right?
yeah,
And I don't, for some families, going bite for bite with their child for a while is life saving. And I know many families that didn't go bite for bite with their child, and that helped their child recover too, because they were able to say, I think, again, with there's no one size fits all, right? I've seen this work both ways, and I think some families might go bite for bite, when they're on the edge of medical stability, and they're going to do whatever it takes. And there are some families, that really, okay, I don't need to do that anymore. I can actually make sure my child eats what they need, because to stay in recovery, they're probably going to have to eat more than their friends when they're out on their
Yeah.
own, right? Or they can't decide what to eat based on what other people are eating. They have to always know that their plate, keep their eyes on their own plate, or distract themselves from their plate with a screen, which is, again, all these things that we think of as like rules about eating, when we're helping someone recover from an eating disorder, if we can kind of broaden our ideas about what's going to be effective. I think having more tools in the tool belt for a family, is really helpful. But yeah, the emotion regulation piece, that's where
Yeah,
that
I've had her on
really
the podcast
can,
before.
yes,
So
I've had, okay,
I'll
I've
link
had
to
two.
that one in the show notes.
Yeah, that's been really helpful for some families. I also help families sometimes trim down their scripts. For some people, the full EFFT process is exactly what they need. For some families, that can just feel so overwhelming. So
Yeah.
I've kind of worked with families to kind of provide a more maybe a condensed version that, if that works, great. And I've seen that be really effective for some families. Yeah, the
Nice.
emotion regulation piece is tough, right? I mean, a lot of times parents will get, because they're so afraid, they think that yelling at their kid that's how they're getting their emotions out. But they also think, if I just yell loud enough or I threaten enough, my child will eat. Um,
Yeah.
and that rarely works. And that's where parents, I think, having other tools helps them, regulate their own emotions, and really helps their child eat, because of adding stress to eating is not that's not going to be effective. And that's one thing I can say for sure.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, sure. And look, I should have probably clarified the work that I've got is not around the eating piece with him. That I mean, that part is fine. It's more, yeah, just other issues that we've been working on where it's been much more helpful. And so, yeah, let me just bring up my list here in terms of where I think would be useful. So, if we start with body image, and maybe it'd be useful if we get something specific with this. What would be a very common thing that comes up with a parent connected to body image? And this could be around a teen, it could be around someone younger, saying, "Hey, we're having this challenge with body image specifically." What would be an example of that?
I think one of the most common is the beginning of puberty,
Okay.
when rapid weight gain is happening, which is essential for the child to develop into their, adult body. But because our culture demonizes weight gain, especially rapid weight gain, and especially weight gain without simultaneous height gain,
Yeah.
right? This strikes fear in the hearts of parents, and even in a lot of pediatricians, right?
Yeah.
Who, I mean, we know, like, pediatricians know a lot about child development and the way those growth curves look. But because of the culture we're in, we tend to overreact to rapid weight gain.
Yeah.
And so this is where a child suddenly, their clothes aren't fitting, their sort of body shape has changed. And it's very tempting for parents to say a couple things. So kid will say, "Oh, I'm getting so fat," right? And a common thing parents might say is, "Oh, you're not fat, honey, you're beautiful."
Yeah.
And compassion to all the parents who said those lines, because I think they've been said, millions of times, because that's something that we've been taught to
Yeah.
say. Um, I would guess most of your audience would already see some of the problems with this response, right?
Yeah.
If we say, "No, honey, you're not fat, you're beautiful," you're saying fat can't be beautiful.
Yeah.
You're also diminishing the child's telling you something, and you're kind of shutting down the conversation. They're feeling something they're not sure what it is, and you're shutting it down. And you're also coming back to prioritizing physical appearance,
Yeah.
right? So we've accidentally kind of tripled down on some of the things that diet culture teaches us. So I encourage parents, if you've done this before, it's okay. You have not, you haven't ruined things for your kid. We can always go back and talk to them, even if it's been a couple of years since this conversation.
Yeah.
If you want to, you can go back. So in those cases, I, advise parents to, really sit and listen to their kids. Tell me more. What do you mean by that? And really find out where the kid is coming from. Is it because their favorite, pants or skirt don't fit anymore? Trousers, sorry for your audience. It could be pants too. Actually, underpants that are too tight are such a body image trigger for kids. So I'm actually glad I said that because, we sometimes forget that our kids need like bigger size undergarments.
Yeah.
Um, and those elastic bands cutting in can really make their body something that they're thinking about all day long while they're fidgeting at school in their chair. And really, they
Yeah.
just needed to go up a few sizes in their undergarments. Um, but I think it's really a conversation about you know, letting the kid share their feelings, showing your curiosity, showing that you can handle this kind of conversation. Because I think for so many of us, body image is like this thing we're so terrified of talking about that we
Yeah.
want to rush in. And, no, 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 it's fine. You're fine, honey. You're beautiful. Or, oh, that's your puberty pudge. You're going to grow out of that really quick. Don't worry. Right?
Yeah.
But again, we're still saying that like the pudge, um, is a problem, but it's temporary.
Yeah.
Well, you don't, first of all, you don't know. They might stay that shape, right? Even as they grow. We don't know. But we're also reinforcing the fear that this is something undesirable or problematic.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's a common one is the
Yeah.
kind of around the puberty. And I think I do think it's a great opportunity where parents can talk about like, yeah, bodies change. Sometimes body change can be uncomfortable at first. And it's like really validating that this can be hard. And
Yes.
maybe you do talk about anti-fatness or diet culture, depending on your kid and what they're interested in. And you can also talk about, clothes are supposed to fit your body, not the other way around. Hey, let's donate your old clothes, or maybe it's time to go shopping for some new clothes and maybe even make it a positive thing. And it's a lesson they can take with them forever because, as we know, bodies continue to change.
Yeah.
And this can be an area where, especially for parents who are entering middle age or maybe even in middle age,
Yeah.
having their own hormonal changes and body changes, right? We get to be role models for this, right? And we can really even connect with our kids on some of this. Like, yeah, boy, in our culture, it's really hard when your jeans don't fit, right?
Yeah.
And even be playful about it in a way rather than it being this thing that, no, we can't talk about this. Like, it's fine, don't worry. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think also, as you said, by having a conversation, you can understand what this means more for them or where this is coming from. Because if you say, don't worry, it's fine, you may have missed an opportunity to hear about the fact, hey, I'm being bullied about this at school. And we could have then done something to have a conversation around that. Or, as you said, like this could be just, oh, I just needed to tell them we could get new clothes. And they were worried about asking for the fact that we need new clothes because money's really tight right now, but we could have found a way to be able to do this as opposed to them just staying in these clothes. So we don't want to make assumptions about what this means for them or why this is coming up. It's better to be able to then have that conversation. And not if, but they are growing into young adults. And so, great, let's start to have some of those more adult conversations around these kinds of things because it's going to be coming up more and more for them, whether they're talking to you about it or not.
Exactly.
Is there another example on this one of body image? Is there another common struggle or area that comes up that people are reaching out to you about?
I think the transition to college is a big one, and the concepts or the myths about the so-called freshman 15.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's a phrase, maybe it's
I think it's
a bit
made
different
made its
there.
way over here, probably more through pop culture, movies, that kind of thing.
Right. And so this fear of weight gain in college, and some kids will try to diet before they start college, and their parents might even make jokes about some of these things, not realizing that actually, the transition to college is a really high risk time for the development of eating disorders or a relapse. And again, taking it as, you know, the beginning of a conversation. If a child says something like, well, I better start doing X, Y, or Z because I don't want to gain the freshman 15, you know, that's something I
Yeah,
might to say, hey, what do you mean? Tell me more. And exactly asking where they're coming from, and that can really guide your next steps in terms of where the conversation is going to go next.
Okay, nice. And what would you then be advising in that situation? Is it just have a conversation and see where this goes? Or, you know what, these tend to be some of the sticking points, and this is the thing that I'm advising them around, or this is where we have a conversation about what to do in the dining hall, or is there any areas that come up a lot connected to this?
I think it comes up a lot for students who are wanting to join like especially for young women wanting to join a sorority.
Okay.
There's a lot of appearance pressure. And those parents I think should really, if they don't feel equipped to have some of these conversations to support their daughter, getting some support around that, right? Because it's really tricky. Like the reality is, yes, you are entering a system where you are being judged on your appearance.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. What are
Yeah.
some of the risks? How are you going to protect yourself if, you're starting to feel preoccupied with your appearance, or if you don't get accepted into the group that you want? Um, I think it's a series of ongoing conversations too. I don't, I think we used to have that idea of like you have the talk about the birds and the bees with kids, and
Yeah.
we now know, no, it's actually thousands of little conversations about sex and development and things like that. And I think it's true for these things as well. And I think the summer leading up to a child going off to college or, living independently can be that great time to experiment with, can they feed themselves, right?
Yeah.
Can they figure out, can they get their needs met without you having to micromanage their food? And that's where if you start to see a lot of restriction, that's a different conversation. And maybe that's where you do bring in a dietitian or someone to give a little bit more information and support. Like, let's figure out how to make sure you know how to like put together some meals on your own, and talk about, what happens if you restrict. Because I think a lot of kids don't realize the risk that they're taking when they're doing something like that, because it's so normalized in our culture.
Yeah, for sure. And so what about in terms of eating disorders? And I know we've obviously talked a lot about the FBT piece, but what are some of the other questions that people are reaching out to you about with this that we haven't touched on so far?
I think that the most well, a couple things. One is when other family members, especially grandparents, make comments about food.
Yeah.
And the other is when kids hear things at school or from their coach about food, where, we might have created this pretty nice, home environment where, people feel free around food, but, we can't keep our kids in this bubble and they're going to have these outside influences. So, having a child come home and say like, well, my coach said I need to cut out X, Y, or Z before, before games, or at school, I had to do a food journal, and then we had to make a better, meal plan for ourselves. This is where parents really are not sure what to do. Like, do I march into the school? Do I call up the coach on the phone? Do I let my kid handle it? And again, these are pretty nuanced. It depends on the age of the child, depends on your relationship with that teacher or coach or grandparent. But these are some of the tricky things I think to navigate,
Okay.
especially if you have an older teen where you think, well, they should be able, to handle this. Then again, this is an adult giving guidance to my child that, like, let's say if they're in recovery from an eating disorder. I think that's where, if your child isn't able to advocate for themselves, that's really a place for parents to step in and say, hey, you need to understand that this kind of assignment or this kind of advice is not helpful and is actually harmful to my child. What more do you want to know, or how can I help support you in learning about this?
Okay. Nice. And in those situations, are you really giving people scripts with that if they need it?
Yeah, sometimes. And and just like our conversations with our kids, I think our conversations with other adults will go a lot better if we aren't coming in like maybe with too much of a plan, right? Really curious, being curious.
Yeah.
I've had families find out, oh, the child was allowed to choose between the food journal assignment and something else, but they chose the food journal assignment,
Yeah.
right? And maybe that's a different conversation. Or the coach says, oh, I didn't say they they couldn't have, you know, whatever sports drink. I just said, save the clear ones for me because I like that flavor better, or whatever.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's something that gets lost in the game of telephone.
Yeah.
So going in, assuming positive intent, coming in with curiosity rather than marching in with like a stack of articles about food restriction or eating disorders. Um, Now, I will say sometimes it's helpful to write the long, angry email, but
Yeah.
not send it, right?
Yeah.
I think it can be very, kind of to your point about parents learning like their own emotion regulation skills. Sometimes that can be a really effective exercise to do that first, and then send the email that just says, "Hey, I'd love to have a conversation about something. Can we meet in person or talk on the phone?"
Yeah, sure. I do a lot of that with clients as well. Like, okay, let's write this letter to your mom or the treatment center or the whatever it was. I want you to get out everything you need to get out. We're not going to send the letter. If you want to send the letter at some point, you can, but the intention is like I want you to have the ability to say all the things that you wish you could say, and then we can then go from there. Yeah,
I love it.
it's a nice tool. So another one would be going to the doctor's office with your child. And I can imagine that there are a number of different scenarios that then come up connected to this. So what are some of the ones that parents are reaching out to you about, and what are some of the suggestions you have connected to this?
Yeah, parents are understandably terrified because we know that comments from a doctor are a very common seed that plants, you know, gets planted that can become an eating disorder later, right? But
Yeah.
my doctor said, but my doctor said. So parents are nervous, especially in the States. We have this new American Academy of Pediatrics guideline around weight that reverses their earlier decision not to, the protocol was not to discuss weight with kids
Yeah.
because of the risk of eating disorders and body image issues. The new recommendation is actually diets for kids as young as 2, weight loss medications for kids as young as 12. They're testing it on 6-year-olds now. Um, and then surgery for kids 13 and up, bariatric surgery. So now, I don't know many pediatricians who are taking these guidelines and aggressively applying them to every kid that comes in their door with a BMI over X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
Um, but it has changed the landscape, right, for families. And I think for parents of kids in larger bodies, especially if parents are also in a larger body, this can just feel like walking through a minefield, right?
Yeah.
Um, Now, these guidelines do say that physicians need to get permission from the parent to talk about weight with the child. I don't think that's happening very often. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's not the part of the guideline that people have focused on. There's not a lot of money to be made by promoting that
Okay.
that step of the process. Um, but parents should know that that actually is, for parents in the States. I don't know how, all the details where you are, but parents, the doctor is not supposed to launch into a discussion about weight. Um, the other piece I think is that not every parent feels they have the resources to push back against a doctor, right?
Yeah.
And this could be whatever there's so many ways that a marginalized identity can make this even harder, right? If,
Yeah.
let's say, English is not your first language, or you're in a larger body, or, you have your own health conditions and the doctor might be making subconscious judgments about you.
Yeah.
Um, and there could be gender dynamics. There's a power differential in that doctor's office. So that's where I do find pre-written scripts really helpful. It helps level the playing field a little bit. There are some wonderful resources out there, written by eating disorder professionals, for instance, so that a parent who's thinking, I need to bring in like some backup, right?
Yeah.
When I make requests of the doctor, they have, you don't have to do this from scratch. So, or you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
So asking ahead of time, letting the doctor's office know, please don't discuss weight in front of my child. If you have any concerns, talk to me privately. If the doctor or nurse forgets, because that happens, I think this is where parents can say, actually, can we talk about that separately? I'd rather not focus on that in this appointment. And then you're probably going to have a conversation with your child. Did you
Yeah.
notice when the nurse made a comment of, this is where, again, while we might want to bubble wrap our kids, it just doesn't make sense because they're going to encounter weight stigma and, all these things in the real world. But
Yeah.
knowing that we can talk to them about it, that we can help them build some skills around it, and that, we're not going to immediately jump to a restrictive diet or something for our child because of an offhand comment at an appointment. So I think, yeah, putting something in the child's chart, right? You can even ask that it be put into the chart. Please do not discuss weight. You could ask for the weight not to be shared with your child, and you might ask them, you might say,
Yeah.
like, sometimes when people learn their weight, it can, numbers can be kind of tricky. We can get kind of fixated on it. How would it feel to not know your weight? Some kids, it's more anxiety provoking not to know.
Yeah.
So again, there isn't one size fits all. I'm personally not a fan of recommending that parents opt their kids out of weigh-ins in general. I know a lot of adults now are, declining to be weighed at the doctor's office, and this can be very empowering. And you can end up having a great appointment with your doctor because you're talking about your actual health concerns and not getting distracted by a number or BMI.
Yeah.
But for kids, because of all the things we've talked about, because kids can start losing weight without parents realizing, I
Yeah.
think having those weight checks, not only at the well visit, but even if your child goes in for something else, the standard, at least here, is the first thing they do is step on the scale. Um, I actually think in general that can be a good thing, right? To be getting more data points on a child. Now,
Yeah.
if getting weighed at the doctor's office is an incredibly traumatic experience because your child has been through a lot, if they're in a larger body and they've been put on, horrible weight loss programs that were very damaging to them, um, that's maybe a different conversation and say, like, you might say, you don't have to know the number, but letting a child in a larger body know, I still want to know, like, if you were losing weight, even by accident, that's something that would be concerning to me. So I do want the doctor taking your weight, letting them know it, like, you're more concerned about weight loss,
Yeah.
even though the medical system is more worried about weight gain.
Yeah.
So those are the thoughts that come to my mind about the doctor's office.
Okay. Nice. Well, I think that's really helpful. As you say, there are scripts online that people can find around this piece. I guess it's really tricky because you say there is this power differential with this. And you also you want someone to feel like, oh, I can go to the doctor's office. Like the last thing you want is someone to not go and then later on they find out they've got stage 4 cancer that actually if we'd got in earlier, we would have found this a lot earlier. And there's lots of different examples connected to that where it would have been really helpful for you to be having these regular checkups to look for all of these different things. And so you don't want the pendulum to swing so far the other way that someone is just avoiding this and doesn't want to take any information that any doctor ever says seriously at all. Maybe having that conversation with your child of like, okay, these are the areas where there's a lot of expertise. These are an area where there's unfortunately just some real blind spots and there's a lack of training and there's a lack of understanding in this area. And that's why we're doing things in this way. But I also want you to be able to go and you've noticed this thing, this lump, whatever. Yeah, go. I really want you to go and get this thing checked out without the fear of, and now I'm going to get a lecture about this other thing. And that's a really tricky thing because there will be times where that will happen with a doctor and that shouldn't be happening, but that's what does occur. And so I can understand why people are then put off from this. And I also had an experience today with a client and she'd gone in, she's an adult client, she'd gone in and done a blind weighing saying, hey, I don't want to know the number. And then they sent her an email the next day and then like the first thing on the top, how to weigh.
First thing, yeah.
First thing. And
Yeah.
it's causing a real problem. And we're trying to resolve the fact that she now knows this and all the thoughts that are coming up connected to it. And so these kind of things really sadden me in that she's doing her absolute best to try and advocate for herself is going through this process and then was very explicit about, I don't want to know this. This is why I'm doing it this way. And then gets an email the next day, basically not following through on what she'd asked. And so I'm saying this just because I think some things like this happen more often than not, and that yeah, that there will be things that get messed up, and that's really uh, heartbreaking, frustrating, um, and we then need to find ways of then being able to navigate through that.
Yeah, I've definitely heard those stories as well. Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. Um, so I'm trying to think. Another one maybe around low self-esteem. Is this something that comes up much in terms of people reaching out to you and asking for advice or suggestions connected to it?
Yeah, and I think it often connects to body image because, I mean, this can go a couple of different directions, but in our culture, we've been taught that if you're not feeling great all the time, that it must be something about you that's wrong and that you should go on a self-improvement project
Yeah,
to fix it. So we do know that, you know, self-esteem issues can precipitate, some disordered behaviors or, negative thoughts about appearance, but also someone who is bullied about their appearance or doesn't feel, at least neutral about their appearance can be more vulnerable to having this sense of low self-worth. And to me, this is where the power of creating a safe haven in your home, right? Where all bodies are good bodies, body diversity is celebrated. We don't disparage our bodies. We don't disparage even the bodies of, let's say, certain political figures that you disagree with.
yeah,
Um, that's just not something that your family does. That all bodies are accepted, celebrated, that and we also can talk about these cultural pressures. I think, especially with teenagers, understanding kind of like, wait a minute, who benefits if I feel bad about myself? Like, oh, this makeup company or this clothing brand or this gym, this workout program or whatever it is, this is where we can really, going back to our earlier conversation about how teenagers often get kind of I don't know, a bad reputation in our
yeah,
culture when in fact teenagers are amazing and they have a really strong, in general, can have a really strong sense of like justice and fairness.
yeah,
And they don't want to be bamboozled, right? The idea of like being tricked by someone into doing something is like often is very like just really angers them. And
yeah,
so I think this is where sometimes we can help kids see that, oh, when when someone makes you feel bad about how you look or just who you are, like they're profiting off of you. Like they're creating this problem and they're trying to sell you a solution.
yeah,
That being said, I don't think we want to skip over kind of that connection and validation piece either, right? I think when we see our kid, we want our kids to see them the way we see them, right?
yeah,
So we think, how can my kid have low self-esteem? Like they're amazing. They're the most wonderful creature that has ever existed. Um, but I think we often can do a disservice to our kids if it's kind of like the no, honey, you're not that,
yeah,
this. If we can say, oh, you're feeling really down about yourself, that's a really awful feeling to have. Tell me more. What does this feel like? Where is this coming from? Or I want to hear, I'm curious. And if they don't want to talk in that moment, saying, let's pick a time. You pick a time when we could talk more about this. Maybe when we're walking the dog tomorrow or we're driving home from school. That's that autonomy piece, right? That it's not always on the parents' terms, right? Giving especially adolescents a chance to say, here's how I want to do it. Maybe they want to text it to you. Maybe
yeah,
they want to leave you a voice note. Um, giving them that, using technology can be our friend. We think of it as like it gets so demonized, right? Like the phone
yeah,
is like the source of all of our problems. And yes, it's contributing to certain problems, but it's also this tool that we can use for a lot of good things too.
yeah,
So I've even worked with families where when the kid is having a tough time, there was like a certain emoji they picked that they text their parents that was sort of like rather than saying like, I'm feeling like really low and I need help, it was easier to text a picture of like the unicorn on the phone to the parent, and that was a sign of like, I need you, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah. So I think the low self-esteem piece, yeah, and again, if it's something where you think this might be going beyond just sort of typical self-consciousness, or there's something more, I think parents listening to their gut should know, like maybe this is a sign of depression or anxiety. There could be something more going on here, and getting them evaluated. Like is there more support we could be giving besides what the parent can provide with that validation and that connection, and maybe a little bit of that harnessing of that social justice or like personal justice feeling about, hey, wait a minute, these fat cats at Instagram are trying to make me feel bad about myself, so I buy this product. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think also, I mean, as I've experienced as a parent, there was so much stuff. It was like, oh, I'm past that, and then you have a kid, and you're like, no, I'm definitely not past that, and it comes up that for a lot of parents, they're dealing with stuff that teenagers are going through, which is very much then mirroring back to them, stuff that they're going through, and sort of in your earlier comments about the, no, it's fine, you're not getting fat, you're beautiful type thing. There is often some reckoning that parents have to do either with the way that they are about themselves or the way that they were parented. And there's definitely conversations that I'll have with clients who are telling me about certain things that are going on with their kids. And for them, this is now an opportunity to be the parent that you wish you could have had, and to be the one who is able to not say, okay, cool, you're worried about your weight. Let me be the mom that takes you to Weight Watchers and helps you diet and that kind of thing, but is the one that is actually really supportive with you and has these difficult conversations and is able to say, hey, these are ways that I really want to show you can support yourself and all of that type of stuff, where someone can start to recognize this is actually what I needed when I was younger, and I now get to do this for my teenager or my kid, and that can also be very healing for that person. But sometimes it takes some work to get there because you're then knocking up against some some open wounds in some of the cases.
Definitely. And I think this is where it's okay to ask for a do-over, right? In the moment, yeah, when you're just flooded with, you're right back to being 12 or 13 years old yourself,
Yeah,
and you don't maybe give the most supportive response. I think, coming back to our kids the next day or the next week and say, hey, I'm so glad you told me about this thing you were worried about. Boy, I don't think I gave you a lot of support in that moment, because I think it took me right back in a time machine to my own teen years.
yeah.
But I'm an adult now and I'm your parent and I really want to help you through this. Tell me more. So yeah, getting those do-overs, I think that's really powerful. Our kids, parents, I think, are worried about showing vulnerability to their kids sometimes. And obviously we're not dumping our emotional stuff on them and asking them to take care of us.
Yeah,
But I think admitting when we're wrong and when we make mistakes, again, especially with adolescence, I mean, that's like gold.
yeah.
This sense of like, oh, my parents really respecting me by admitting their mistakes, and can really bring you a lot closer, even though parents might think, no, I have to present this like strong, perfect, exterior all the time, when in fact, what our kids actually need is for us to be authentic and vulnerable and connect. Yeah, but it's not easy.
No, well, I mean, you're
Oh,
then role modeling the real world for your kids. Like the amount of times I've had conversations and done the repair work, I think it comes up a lot, and you're then showing how to do conflict resolution. You're showing how to reflect on my behaviors or my emotional state in that moment, and that actually, okay, I got caught up in that thing or I swept up in that thing, and I'm really sorry with the way that I spoke to you in that moment or the way that I handled that. And how was it for you? Tell me what your experience was like. Again, you're just having these conversations. And I think actually you're much better, and I'm not advocating like intentionally mess up, but it's going to happen anyway. You're much better at being able to role model that, hey, I messed up and then I was able to quickly repair, Like, it's not that, okay, I had that time where I really raised my voice and you got scared. It's like, okay, within half an hour or the next day, I sat down and I was like, I really need to apologize about what happened last night. And I don't know, I feel like there's a big shift now in parenting that I don't think was something that happened a generation ago. Being able to have more of these kinds of conversations with kids, and I think it's really important to show that even as adults, like we have troubles with emotion regulation in moments. And I think for kids to be able to see that, because otherwise it feels like I'm the only one that goes through this. It's like, no, I'm in my 40s and I still struggle with these things from time to time. And so yeah, it's probably a little bit rich of me to expect you as a 7-year-old to not have that happen. And so being able to have conversations and really model that, I think is super important.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. One of the other things that I can't remember if you did an article on this or it was a Instagram post, but just talking about eating disorders in teen boys. And so how much is this coming up with the people that you're seeing or are reaching out to you and yeah, talk more about this.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a part of quite a few articles on this topic. It's a passion of mine because I think, again, that education piece. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've met someone and they say, "Oh, what do you do?" And I tell them, and they say, "Oh, I'm so lucky I don't have to worry about that. I only have boys."
Yeah.
And then I have to have the heartbreaking say, actually, you do need to be aware of these things and know about these things because it's one of the fastest growing groups of people getting diagnosed with eating disorders. Um, a 2020 study showed that 1 in 7 males will have an eating disorder by age 40. Currently in treatment, 1 in 4 people in treatment are boys and men. I think many boys and men don't get treatment,
Yeah.
don't get diagnosis. So I don't think it's really that 25% of people with eating disorders are male. I think we're getting closer to 50-50.
Yeah.
Um, but we just don't know. And I think what is important for parents to know is that boys can get all the same eating disorders as girls, yes, including anorexia.
Yeah.
And boys can also develop a preoccupation with, bulking up, being lean, but also really muscular, which people, have coined as, bigorexia.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it's really just falling under a body dysmorphia diagnosis. But I care less about, from my perspective, like what diagnostic criteria necessarily it's going to point to. But if you see your son focusing on, protein at the expense of other macronutrients, if your son is working out in a way that just feels like it's just a little obsessive or compulsive, or it's joyless. A lot of parents are told, if your son starts turning down social opportunities to go to the gym, that's a red flag. And if certainly it is a red flag. I think there's usually signs before that point,
Yeah.
right? And things like supplement powders and um, you know, a lot of these things that are unregulated that can have pretty dangerous components in them, or it can even be a slippery slope to kids experimenting with anabolic steroids and things like that. Um, so, you know, parents need to know terms like bulking and cutting, intermittent fasting, biohacking. The terms that their boys might use, they aren't necessarily going to be like the word diet probably isn't going to come up, but
Yeah.
you might hear things about like performance or, and this is coming, dads should be really paying attention to this as well, because the way that diet and wellness culture now market to men, right? Again,
Yeah.
it doesn't sound like the way it's necessarily marketed to women, right? A lot of it is about performance and vitality and longevity. And again, like these terms like biohacking that, can really sound cool, right? And some of it's like, oh, my body's like a science experiment, right? This is so cool. But not realizing how that can really kick off disordered behaviors, and that our kids and our sons are obviously, parents of any gender can influence kids of any gender,
Yeah.
but especially for dads thinking about their sons, the way that they're modeling, you know, what it means to like be a man in the world and what body image means. The other piece that's so tricky is that, boys often don't talk to each other about body image the way girls might, right? You put a room
Yes.
of teenage girls together or a group of adult women together, and unfortunately, or maybe it's better or for worse, I don't know, there's going to be talk about bodies, right? And how they're feeling about their bodies. Boys, again, in general, aren't necessarily going to be talking as directly about these things. There might be jokes and teasing about bodies,
Mm.
but um, this is where parents can um, let their sons know that this is a topic they can talk to them about. There's a really nice book called Being You, the Body Image Book for Boys. I think I have that title correct. One of the authors is Dr. Charlotte Markey, and she has two co-authors whose names escape me right now.
I'll
Um,
put it in the show notes. So yeah.
okay, but it's even just like giving your son a book like that, there's sort of conversation starters. It doesn't mean like, okay, I'm giving them the book, I'm done. I don't have to talk about this, but it can be a great conversation starter just to share a book like that that really talks to boys about, it's not just about weight and shape. Boys can have all kinds of other body image, whether it's having body hair or not having body hair. Do they have a certain kind of jawline? The way that boys are getting appearance pressures now, it's not like when we were kids.
Yeah.
It has gone to a whole new level. So it's not surprising that a recent study showed middle school boys, I think 75% of boys have body dissatisfaction. 75% of middle school boys. Like we've never seen numbers like that before, but thanks to social media, thanks to the way that wellness and diet culture have come for men and boys, right? It actually
Yeah.
makes sense that they're having some of these same kind of appearance concerns that we used to only associate with girls.
Yeah, for sure. And I kind of reflect upon myself with this in that I like when I was in high school, the joke was always like it looked like I was in the wrong grade. There's a photo of me. I can't remember if it was year 8 or year 9, and it looks like I'm in the wrong grade because I'm just so much smaller than everyone else. And I was very insecure about the fact that I was going through puberty a lot later than other kids, and that I was in this smaller body. But the one thing that was different then compared to now was I never got the message that I could change that thing. And that was possibly lucky in the household that I was in because I didn't have a dad who was then saying, "Hey, let's go to the gym and we're gonna put a load of muscle on you," or anything along those lines. It was just very much, well, this is just how it is, and I can't do much about that. And there is something that is useful about that. Like I can be disappointed, but there's something added when you're like, but you can change this. And you just need to then go and get your protein or creatine powder, or you need to then do intermittent fasting, or you need to do these things. If those things were available to me and were in my consciousness, I don't know what I would have done. But we didn't have all of these different things. And so yeah, I think there's just a lot more that is put onto boys and men. And I also think that the way it's talked about is very different. As you said, it's about biohacking and longevity and maximizing performance and efficiency. And it's very much same kinds of people who are really into marketing are also then really into all of this type of stuff. And you've got the Huberman Lab and Peter Attia and all of these kind of people who are very much put up on this pedestal as these he goes to Stanford and he knows all of this stuff, and these are the doctors who know everything about everything, and we're thinking about it in this very different way of like, no, 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 that's not dieting. This is about life extension. And so I think it can be much easier for that to get missed in that, okay, whether it's when it's a girl and she's saying I'm going on a diet because I want to lose weight, like we're calling a spade, and we then have some red flags about, oh, okay, maybe this is not a good thing. But when someone's talking about, well, I just really want to help my performance and my ability to focus, and that's then going to get me into the better college or university that I want to go to, it can be like, oh wow, I love that dedication. That's great that you're doing that. And I know it's not so black and white and that men and boys are doing it this way and women and girls are doing it that way. But I do think that the verbiage and the language that is used around the way that men do food and boys do food is just very, very different. And so I understand why it can so easily get missed. But I'm with you. I think the statistics don't tell us the real truth around this stuff and how common eating disorders really in and it really are. And I think one, there has always been a lot more going on in terms of this affecting males. And two, I also think it is rapidly increasing just because of all the new demands and pressures that are being placed upon. And I saw something recently on Instagram. I grew up, I finished school in 99. And so I think it was in 2000, 2001, somewhere around there, Fight Club came out. And that was like Brad Pitt, that was then like the epitome of what every guy of my generation thought was like, okay, that's like the perfect body. And seeing something recently where people talking about that as being like, oh, Brad Pitt's tiny in that film, just of how much culture in the last 20 odd years that has just shifted so greatly. And so yeah, it was just we have really shifted in our culture in terms of the expectations around what bodies for men should look like and what should be done to achieve that. And so basically we've just kind of created the same or similar rules that have been put on women, and we've seen how that's worked out for the last handful of decades. The other thing I wanted to ask about with you is, and I know this was something that you did, I think it was over the pandemic. So you said the Common Sense Camp, and that this was this program that you developed, and I don't know a huge amount of details about it. I saw this on your site and was and wanted to ask and find out more. So yeah, tell me about this.
Yeah, so common sense camp as a phrase was sort of an inside joke in our family. Whenever our kids didn't, know like how to do what we thought was sort of a basic life skill, my husband and I, who grew up, in the era of, an era where you just kids had a lot more independence, a lot more free time. We didn't have the internet, so you just figured out a lot on your own. And um, we're Generation X, so we all the associations you have with that of like drinking out of the garden hose and um, you know, being a latchkey kid coming home from school to an empty house and making your own snack and, putting your own laundry in and all that. Well, our kids they don't live in that world. The world is different. And so sometimes we would joke, oh my gosh, our kids need common sense camp. Like they don't know how to do this basic thing. And, we would teach them. Well, in 2020, when both of our kids would have gone to some summer programs, we were thinking, what are we going to do to, for the summer and how to make summer feel different from the prior months where we're just all stuck at home.
Yeah.
Um, we said, hey, why don't we actually let's do common sense camp. Let's really do this. So my husband and I planned out a series of kind of lessons or topics, right? Things like cooking, cleaning and laundry, how to take care like car care, some handy skills around the house. So we put together a little curriculum together. Again, this was 2020, right? There was like a lot of
It was
time.
time.
There was time. And I wrote an article explaining like we're going to run a common sense camp this summer. I thought it was kind of funny and I shared it and it sort of went viral. I had like a little 15 minutes of fame. I was on Good Morning America talking about it and it was so surreal. Um, but it was really fun and we still come back to that. We often we'll realize one of our kids is missing a certain, sort of life skill that, they don't teach in schools anymore, right?
Yeah.
For the most part. So Yeah, so I wrote up a little guidebook for parents who wanted to do their own version of it. It's very DIY. Parents would email me, "Can I send my kids to your house to learn all this?" And I'm like, "Well, I get it, but your kid needs to learn how to use your washer and dryer and your dishwasher and how to take care of the yard at your house. It's going to be different from my house." So I wrote a little guide for parents, and a lot of people did it. And I included even things, um, like some social justice things. That was the summer of, Black Lives Matter marches that one of our kids participated in, how to be a good ally, a good upstander in the face of injustice. We did first aid and CPR and things just a kind of a whole range of life skills. And I think having that time was really, really nice. And even today, parents still reach out and say, "Hey, do you still do this?" Um, and most parents don't have this kind of time anymore. But, even over a spring break or a winter break, I've heard from so many families who say, I finally, the kids are making one of the dinners over the holidays, or, my kids learned how to change the oil and now they're going to go get their driver's license. And it's really fun to think about building that connection with our kids, passing on these skills, and we're building going back to your questions about self-esteem
Yeah.
and autonomy, kids learning these hands-on skills is it's really powerful. And especially the kitchen things, back to the food piece, a lot of our nutrition education, in my opinion, we give kids a lot of nutrition facts and also a lot of myths.
Yeah.
And but we don't often give our kids the chance to learn about food and about cooking and about, how to put a meal together, how to plan maybe a few days of meals ahead of time, how to go to the grocery store. Um, and those are really important life skills if we want our kids to be able to nourish themselves and also maybe even nourish their friends and people they love, right? That learning how to cook for people is really this great connector. I think about the fact that the pandemic started 5 years ago. And in a lot of ways, we still aren't quite back, doing it. The rhythm of life is never hasn't been quite the same, at least in my community.
Yeah.
Um, and food is one of those things that brings people together, and wanting my kids to know how to put a quick thing together so that their friends come over and they have something homemade. It doesn't have to be homemade, but even if it's reheating something, a frozen thing from the grocery store, knowing how to put it on a platter and have their friends feel welcome, I think that's a really powerful life skill.
Yeah. Nice. So do you have this as a PDF or a something that people can get from you?
Yes, I do. It is very DIY. Like it's
Yeah.
not very prescriptive. It sort of helps you make a plan for your family.
Cool.
And and it was written in the earlier days of the pandemic. So, some of it isn't, I haven't bothered to update it. So it's a little bit of a time capsule. It'll take you right back to like 2020. But yeah, I do still have that.
Okay, cool. And just because as you were talking there, I know you said, okay, it was as a like a summer camp, but even if someone looked at this and thought, okay, we could do this over the course of a year, and we can just, you know what, we've got that Saturday where we're going to do that thing, and just starting to think about this would be really helpful, of things for them to learn. Like I'm reflecting as you were talking on when I finished school. My mom said, "Okay, great. Like you're all. I think was it. Yeah, I think I would finish school. My sister was still in school. My older brother was out of school, and she said, "Look, I'm not doing all the cooking anymore. So pick a night each week, and you can do some cooking." And then when I moved over to the UK, I started doing more cooking, and now at home, I'm the predominant one that cooks, and I really enjoy that, and it's a skill that I have. I feel very comfortable in a kitchen. I can follow a recipe, but I can throw anything together, and that all came about because of this initial nudge of, hey, we're gonna have you do some cooking once a week. And I can't remember how long that went on for, but it was enough to give me that spark and also that confidence of, oh, I can make something without burning down the house, or I can make more than just some toast. Yes, I still can't change the oil in a car, so maybe I need something on that. But I think just learning some of these skills, as you say, it's not even just about the skill. It then feeds into someone's confidence in terms of their self-esteem, and it's helpful outside of just the skill that someone is learning.
I love that.
Yeah. And so the last thing I want to just ask you, and I know this is probably quite a broad question to finish on, but yeah, I'd just love to hear your thoughts on this, is that you talk a lot about teaching kids about healthy food, and I've read a number of articles of how this isn't a great thing when it's taught in school, and healthy food curriculums can really backfire, especially for kids who are predisposed to develop eating disorders. And so, how would you recommend we talk to kids about healthy eating? Or maybe we even remove the word healthy. How do we help kids develop that relationship with food? What advice would you have in this arena?
Yeah, isn't it a shame that the word healthy has been co-opted by diet culture in a way that can actually make kids unhealthy? I mean, it drives me
Yeah.
up the wall.
Yeah.
Um,
And as someone
but
who has the
the
word health in their brand name, I feel the same way.
right, I mean, it's really tricky. I mean, I think, we're trying to expand what what health means. And I think,
Yeah.
you said the word relationship. What I invite parents and educators to think about is that we want our kids to have a healthy relationship with food. And when we label foods as healthy or unhealthy, that actually interferes with the healthy relationship with food.
Yeah.
So I like starting from that kind of common ground. Oh, we want our kids to have a healthy relationship with food. How do
Yeah.
we do that? Well, one thing is by no longer dividing food into like a binary or even a hierarchy. A lot of schools teach, red light, yellow light, green light foods. Even Sesame Street teaches sometimes foods and anytime foods. And which shocks me because Sesame Street is known like this was children's programming built from the foundation of understanding child development.
Yeah.
And words like sometimes and anytime, these are so abstract. And for
Yeah.
our little concrete thinkers,
Yeah.
right? How often is sometimes,
Yeah.
right? And to have kids questioning, like, am I eating this too often? This can just really they can get preoccupied with food and questioning things. And it may not develop into an eating disorder, but we know that having these labels around food can really create a fraught relationship with food that can last someone's whole life.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so there are a lot of, it's funny, we used to say good and bad foods, and people are like, oh no, that's really problematic. We'll just say healthy and unhealthy. But kids understood, kids are smart. This is the same binary. One is good and one is bad.
Yeah.
So then, yeah, we got sometimes anytime food. I've heard some families do fun food and fuel, like fun versus fuel.
Yeah.
Um, I've heard it. So I think people they think, oh, if I just use gentler binary language, it's going to be fine. And maybe for some kids it is. I think some kids, yeah, they can take it or leave it. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But for a lot of kids, I think it can be very confusing. So that really, for anyone listening who thinks, I want my kids to have a healthy relationship with food, I think we want to take a step back and try to move away from labeling foods as, into categories, right? Now, food groups, that could be for some kids, understanding the different food groups can be a category that is like a safer thing to think about, as long as we're not saying, here are the good food groups and
Yeah.
here are the, right?
Yeah.
Because the way that protein is like king right now and carbohydrates are still seen as like the boogeyman, this is really creating a problem. So we want to be careful, even when talking about food groups, that we're not saying like, here are the better ones, and that like kids need all of the food groups.
Yeah.
Um,
Adults need all of the food groups as well.
yes, yes, they absolutely do. Um, so I think, the language we use around food really matters. I don't think it's the only thing. We talked about role modeling earlier. We can't just talk about it. We have to be about it. And the language we use can shape our thoughts and behaviors and beliefs around food. So when we stop seeing food as bad or unhealthy or a red light food, it can really change the dynamic and kind of the vibe in the house.
Yeah.
Um, so even, and there's some trickier words too, like, you know, for some people, balance and moderation, those words work for them. For kids, I find those to be, again, these tricky, abstract terms that really, again, can undermine that healthy relationship with food. So I'm a fan of families offering a variety of foods and modeling enjoying a variety of foods without shame, guilt, compensatory behaviors.
Yeah.
You know, the kids don't have to like burn it off, or adults don't have to burn anything off or earn food through exercise. And those are the things that I think really help kids develop that healthy relationship with food.
Yeah. Nice. And I think one, as a parent, you really need to have a healthy relationship with food to be able to pass that on and model that, because it then, as you say, you can say all the right things, but they're also going to notice that, hey, mom or dad isn't eating this thing or that thing, or they're not having dinner most of the nights or whatever. Like that can get picked up upon the messages that are being given if someone doesn't have a healthy relationship with food. And I know that can be difficult. Like work with adults who are trying to work on that. So it's not to shame anyone. It's just more talking about it's important to work on this stuff for you as well as for your kids. And I also think figuring out what works for your family. Because I guess that's definitely been one of the things that we've learned through going through this experience. And I have a very healthy relationship with food, and we've still had to navigate certain things. I was very much in favor of the whole Ellen Satter division of responsibility. My responsibility is here, I'm going to provide these things for you, and your responsibility is you're going to eat them, and we're as a family all going to eat the same foods generally, but we're just going to put down some different options and see what works. And the reality is that that doesn't often work with us. There can be 6 nights a week, where Rams is eating pasta because that's just what has to work for him. And so the whole division of responsibility piece and us all eating the same things, that doesn't necessarily work with us. And we then need to figure that out and be okay with that and work out, okay, well, what does modeling a healthy relationship with food look like in this household? And so I'm just saying this so that people don't sort of read a book like that and think, okay, this is now I've found it, and so I just need to implement this, and then that doesn't work, and it feels like I must be failing somewhere. It's just understanding that different people have different needs, and we can model that healthy relationship with food in very different ways depending on that, and where someone gets to and what their thoughts on variety are is going to be different to what someone else's thoughts on variety is. And so just being okay with it not looking like the Instagrammable food photo with all the family sitting down to the exact same meal, because that's what I thought should be what's happening.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah. So is there anything that I haven't asked that you would like to talk about before we wrap this up?
Um, just in your last comment, I was thinking, you know, we know that even parents with eating disorders can raise kids who have a healthy relationship with food.
Yeah.
So for folks who are listening who think, oh gosh, I have to get all my stuff perfect before I can help my kids.
Yeah.
I don't think that's true. And, you know, depending on the age of your child, if it's developmentally appropriate and you can share that like you know you're working on something, this is something you struggle with, and you know I think having things out in the open can be really really beneficial and less scary to kids than the unspoken. And to your point about, you know, there isn't always a one size fits all, you know, like the family feeding. Yes, the Allen Satter method can be very helpful, and for a neurotypical kid, and actually for a lot of research on parents with eating disorders, the division of responsibility model has, with support, can be an effective and really helpful way to write every bite.
Yeah.
So we have some evidence that actually it can be quite helpful for some people. Um, but that more responsive or attuned feeding, that sounds like your family found its way to, you know, I
Yeah.
think that can be really powerful. And I think you can kind of, I mean, I think what's beautiful about the Alan Satter piece is not micromanaging and not policing kids' food and having structure, right? Predictable, way back to the beginning, in family-based treatment, you're not following the Alan Sat, like it would not be appropriate to follow Alan Satter's division of
Yes.
responsibility for someone in the acute stages of an eating disorder. So I just want to make sure like hit that little footnote there.
Yes, for
Um,
sure.
that all of these things that we've talked about, like you said, every family has to figure out what works for them in that moment. And like you said, the Instagram images put so much pressure on parents, right? To have like these rainbow bento box lunches for their kids that they somehow eat all of.
Yeah.
Um, and, that pressure that parents feel, then it's the kids feel that pressure, we pass it on to them. And pressure is one of the things that interferes with that healthy relationship with food. So if we can take the pressure off ourselves a little bit, that's going to take the pressure off our kids. And we can have those more peaceful, even joyful, relaxed meal times that are nourishing beyond what we can capture on a nutrition label, right? That
Yeah.
nourishment we get from eating together, even if we're not eating the same things. And some kids can't eat at a table with parents. Again, they might have to eat in a slightly different way. Every family is going to find what works for them, but approaching all of this with that kind of curiosity and, you know, exploration, like if it's not working, let's try something else, I think, can really help parents find what works for them.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I mean, it's not that I have disavowed everything that Ellen Satter has ever said. It's like, oh, we use a lot of that. And I think, as you say,
Mhm.
the regularity piece is really important. And it's just being able to navigate your way through it. And I think the word curiosity is something that I'm a big advocate of. It's how I want people to be doing recovery as well, of let's put on our experimentation hat and approach this from a place of curiosity as well. And so, yeah, I agree the same with the family feeding piece. And it was something that we had to try out some different things and figure out what worked, and what's working for us now might not be working for us in some point in the future. And we'll reassess and figure out what the next plan is. But yeah, just being able to be flexible and curious with it, I think is really, really important. So look, this has been wonderful. Where can people be finding out more about you if they want to connect more or want to read more of your stuff?
Yeah, well, one place to go would be my website, which is oonahanson.com. I always say when in doubt, it's an O. And I post the most on Instagram of all the social media. There I'm Oona_Hanson. There's a Oona Hanson on Instagram that's a baby. So if you go to Instagram and you find a baby, that's not me. Um, and then I do have the Parenting Without Diet Culture newsletter on Substack, where I really try to give parents practical tips and scripts and strategies for navigating this crazy diet culture world that we're in. And
Yeah.
I do also talk a little bit about eating disorders there as well. So if parents are navigating that, they'll find some good resources on the newsletter too.
Okay, perfect. Well, look, I will put all of those things in the show notes. And yeah, thanks so much for coming on for your time. Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
So that was the episode with Oona Hanson. I loved this conversation. I love what Oona is doing. If you resonated with this, then I suggest that you follow her on Instagram, you subscribe to her Substack, and if you are a parent that is needing this support, then please get in contact with her. So that is it for this week's episode. As I mentioned at the top, I'm currently taking on new clients. If you want to reach a place of full recovery, then I would love to help. You can send an email to info@7-health.com and just put coaching in the subject line, and I can send over the details to you. So that is it for this week's episode. I will catch you again next week. Until then, take care, and I will see you soon.